Hi everyone. Today, we take a closer look at the Japanese heavy cruiser Nachi, one of the most famous and battle-hardened warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy during the Second World War. Imagine a cruiser that broke every standard of its era. While most navies around the world were focusing on artillery duels, Japanese engineers created something different, something unpredictable. A warship whose greatest weapon remained unseen until the moment of impact. This ship didn't just fire, it struck like a dagger in the back of the enemy fleet. Its name was Nachi. February 1942. The Java Sea. The combined Allied fleet desperately attempts to halt the Japanese advance. What happens next will shock the opposing naval commanders and lead to one of Japan's most decisive victories at sea. Because Nachi carried a hidden trump card, the legendary Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, unmatched range, devastating explosive power, and almost complete invisibility, thanks to the lack of a telltale bubble trail. For the Allies, it was like being struck by a weapon they could not see, and could not escape. The destruction of the Allied fleet in the Battle of the Java Sea became a textbook example of Nachi's dominance, and of Japan's mastery of night combat. Enemy cruisers and destroyers were wiped out, while Nachi and her sister ships emerged almost unharmed. This victory opened the door for the Japanese occupation of Indonesia. And Nachi didn't stop there. She fought across nearly every major theater of the Pacific War, from the Philippines to the Aleutians, and all the way to her final battles in Leyte Gulf. Not a showpiece, not a fleet mascot, but a true workhorse of the Imperial Navy, always on the front line. Now, let's take a closer look at what made the design of the Japanese heavy cruiser Nachi so bold, so innovative, and so far ahead of its time. From the moment she left the drawing board, Nachi was engineered not to compete, but to dominate. One of the most impressive elements of her design was the propulsion system. Powered by 12 Campon-type boilers driving 4 sets of single reduction geared turbines, each connected to its own shaft and spinning 3-bladed propellers, Nachi developed nearly 130,000 horsepower. The result? A top speed of over 33 knots, faster than most American cruisers of the time, and equal to the very fastest in the world. That speed wasn't just a number on paper. It was the cornerstone of Japanese tactical thinking. Close the distance rapidly, unleash a devastating torpedo strike, and withdraw before becoming trapped in a prolonged gun duel. But perhaps the most controversial part of Nachi's design was how Japan worked around the limits of the Washington Naval Treaty. On paper, she complied with the standard limit of 10,000 tons. In reality, her full load displacement approached 15,000 tons. That extra weight wasn't wasted, it was turned into survivability. Nachi carried a 102 mm armored belt, set at an intentional angle to increase its effective thickness. This protection was equal to, and in some cases better than, that of her American contemporaries. Her designers also placed great emphasis on shielding the ship from fragmentation and medium-caliber hits, adding multiple armored bulkheads throughout the interior. And for a cruiser built in the 1920s, Nachi had surprisingly strong anti-torpedo defenses, considered highly effective for its class. One of Nachi's advantages was her ability to see first and strike first. She carried up to 3 reconnaissance float planes, more than most rival cruisers of the era, which usually carried only 1 or 2. These aircraft allowed Nachi to reach far beyond the horizon, to scout ahead of the fleet, to track enemy movements and, most importantly, to correct long-range gunfire. With their help, her artillery could deliver accurate hits at distances where many opponents were simply firing blind. and that artillery was nothing short of formidable. Nachi was armed with 10 203mm raw 8-inch naval guns, the most powerful main battery ever mounted on a heavy cruiser at the time. They were installed in 5 twin turrets, 3 positioned forward and 2 aft. This configuration allowed her to focus 8 of her guns directly ahead or astern, and to bring all 10 to bear in a massive full broadside. While most heavy cruisers of the period carried 8 or 9 guns, Nachi always had the advantage in firepower. Her secondary armament supported this strength as well. She carried 8 127mm dual-purpose guns that could be used against both surface targets and aircraft. As the threat from the air increased during the war, Nachi adapted. By her final refit, she was protected by a powerful umbrella of anti-aircraft fire, 52 25mm guns, supported by 2 13mm mounts. But even this wasn't what made Nachi truly terrifying. Her real trump card, the weapon that changed naval warfare, was the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo. No navy in the world expected such a breakthrough. These torpedoes could travel up to 40 kilometers, nearly 3 times farther than their American or British counterparts. The warhead was enormous, nearly half a ton of explosives, and their speed and range were unmatched. Most frightening of all, they left no visible bubble trail, making the attack almost impossible to detect until it was too late. The secret lay in its oxygen-powered engine. By using oxygen instead of compressed air, the attack became sudden and undetectable. Nachi carried 12 of these torpedoes in 4 triple launchers and could reload them even while underway. That turned her into something Western naval planners hadn't imagined, a hybrid warship with the gun power of a cruiser and the knockout punch of a destroyer squadron. She could decide the outcome of a battle with a single surprise torpedo strike, launched from a distance where the enemy couldn't even return fire. Alone or as part of a formation, Nachi could destroy any enemy cruiser and inflict serious damage on battleships, utilizing night battle tactics and long-range torpedo attacks. It was a long-range sniper and a close-quarters knife fighter in one, a design that was years ahead of Western naval conceptions of what cruisers were capable of. But superiority always comes at a price. For Nachi, that price was weight. She was pushed to the very limits of stability. Her design was complex, difficult to build, and extremely expensive to maintain. And there was another weakness that time would reveal. At the beginning of the war, her anti-aircraft defenses were already considered modest. Even after modernization, they were never enough to counter the growing dominance of naval aviation. To survive attacks from the air, she needed support. And when the critical moment arrived, that support simply wasn't there. After her bold and innovative design was finalized, construction of the heavy cruiser Nachi began at the Kure Naval Arsenal on November 26, 1924. She entered the water for the first time on June 15, 1927, a sleek new symbol of Japan's rapidly modernizing navy, and was officially commissioned on November 26, 1928. Political prestige intervened. The unfinished cruiser was ordered to Yokosuka to take part in the Grand Naval Review honoring the coronation of Emperor Hirohito on December 4. All ships of the Miyako class were assigned to the Sasebo Naval District, forming the 4th Squadron of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 3rd Fleet. Throughout the 1930s, they trained and maneuvered together as a single, well-coordinated fighting unit. During a naval review off Kobe on October 26, 1930, a technical flaw revealed itself. Exhaust gases poured across the bridge. The solution came quickly. The forward smokestack was lengthened by 2 meters to redirect the flow. Nachi soon found herself in real operational service. During the first Shanghai incident in February 1932, she escorted transport ships carrying Imperial Army troops to the Chinese mainland. Later that same year, she and her sister ships were placed in reserve as the new Takao-class cruisers entered service. From 1933 to 1935, the entire Miyako class underwent an important upgrade. Their fixed triple torpedo launchers were replaced with two powerful quadruple rotating launchers, and their secondary artillery was significantly strengthened. During this time, Nachi was commanded first by Captain Teruhisa Komatsu, and later by Captain Mishitaro Totsuka. Then came the first major modernization. In 1936, at the Sasebo Naval Arsenal, Nachi began a comprehensive refit, and only a year later she was already back at sea with a mission shaped by war. With the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, Nachi transported headquarters elements of the Imperial Japanese Army's 3rd Division and 6th Infantry Regiment from Nagoya to China, as part of a formidable task force of 6 cruisers and 8 destroyers. By December 1937, she entered her second modernization, one that pushed her combat capabilities even further. The number of torpedoes was doubled to 16, 8 more Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft guns were added, and hull bulges were installed to improve stability. By the late 1930s, she had evolved into one of the most dangerous and heavily armed ships afloat. As the Pacific War erupted in late 1941, Nachi was already positioned for action. Based at the Makogat district in the Pescadores Islands, she formed the Corps of Sentai 5 together with her sister ship Miyako. Under the command of Rear Admiral Takeo Takagi, the 2 cruisers deployed from Palau to support Operation M, the invasion of the southern Philippines. After covering the landings at Legazpi on December 11, Nachi and Miyako returned to Palau and were reassigned to the attack force of Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka. Together, they shielded Japanese troops pouring into Davao on December 19, and Jolo just 5 days later. While anchored at Davao, the invasion force was attacked by B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. Miyako was struck by a 500-pound bomb, but survived with only superficial damage. With his flagship temporarily compromised, Admiral Tanaka transferred his command to Nachi, sending Miyako back to Sasebo for repairs. From that moment forward, Nachi became the driving force of the campaign. In January, Nachi and Hoguro covered the invasion of the Celebes, and then Ambon. But it was the next battle, the Battle of the Java Sea, that would carve Nachi's name deep into naval history. On February 27, Nachi's reconnaissance float planes were first to locate the last remaining Allied fleet attempting to defend the Netherlands East Indies. Hoguro struck first, sinking the destroyer HNLMS Cortinair with a torpedo and crippling HMS Exeter. Nachi opened fire from more than 12,5 miles and landed 2 hits on the heavy cruiser USS Houston, one penetrating the bow, the other smashing through the aft section. But the decisive blow came that evening. Nachi and Hoguro pursued the retreating Allied force and closed to 9 miles, the perfect distance for a torpedo kill. A single torpedo from Nachi detonated the 5.9-inch magazines of the Dutch light cruiser HNLMS Java. She split in 2 and sank in just 2 minutes. Moments later, a torpedo from Hoguro fatally struck HNLMS De Ruyter. The cruiser slowly filled with water and sank over the next 3 hours, taking with her Admiral Karel Dorman, and with him, all remaining hope of stopping the Japanese advance. 2 days later, on March 1, Nachi, Hoguro and their destroyers encountered the crippled Exeter. Reinforced by Miyako and Ashigara, the 4 cruisers poured shells into Exeter, destroying her power, igniting fires and knocking out her remaining boilers. Unable to move or fight, she was scuttled by her own crew. Nachi and Hoguro withdrew while Miyako and Ashigara overwhelmed the destroyer HMS Encounter. The destroyer USS Pope managed to escape briefly, only to be found 2 hours later by aircraft from the light carrier Ujo. Crippled from above, she was finished off by Miyako and Ashigara. By the end of the campaign, the Allied fleet in the region was gone. And Nachi, with her speed, her guns, and her long lance torpedoes, had become one of the most feared warships in the Pacific. After the fierce victories in the south, Nachi was sent to a very different battlefield, the cold, hostile northern seas. In late March, the cruiser received a refit in Sasebo to prepare for subarctic operations. And soon, her engines carried her into the fog-covered Kurile Islands. In April and May, she patrolled these remote waters, then returned to Ominato on June 23. But there was no rest. Just 5 days later, Nachi departed again, this time to escort a convoy to the freezing, windswept island of Kiska, where Japanese troops were holding out in isolation. She remained in the Aleutians until early July. Another refit at Yokosuka followed. And Nachi returned north, reassigned to the 5th Fleet together with Kiso and Dama. Through the harsh winter of 1942 and into March 1943, Nachi continued her lonely patrols of the Kyles, until a new mission arrived. The fleet was ordered to reinforce Attu. And on the 26th of March, everything changed. While escorting another convoy toward Attu, Nachi sighted an American force, the cruisers Richmond and Salt Lake City, supported by 4 destroyers. Vice Admiral Hosogawa had powerful ships at his disposal, Maya, Tama, Abukama, and 2 destroyers. But there was a problem. A major one. Maya had no aircraft aboard, and one of Nachi's 3 float planes had been left behind for repairs. Hosogawa ordered Nachi's remaining aircraft to launch, but then ordered the main guns to open fire before they could take off. The shock wave from the first salvo crippled the aircraft sitting on the starboard catapult. It was pushed overboard. And lost forever. The remaining planes finally launched and circled overhead as the Battle of the Komandorski Islands began. Nachi fired her torpedo batteries at the American task force, but without result. What followed was a grueling, 4-hour gunnery duel in Arctic weather. The Japanese fleet damaged Salt Lake City and Bailey, but Nachi was struck 5 times in return. 14 sailors died, and Maya's forward turret suffered heavy damage. In the end, the Japanese fleet turned back. The attempt to reinforce Attu had failed, and Vice Admiral Hosogawa was removed from command in disgrace. Nachi limped back to Yokosuka for repairs, where 8 additional Type 96 anti-aircraft guns were installed. By mid-May she returned to Paramushiro, and later, to Kiska, where she took part in the evacuation of the stranded Japanese garrison. On September 6, as she departed Ominato, the submarine USS Halibut struck her with 2 torpedoes. Luck, or fate, was on Nachi's side this time. Both torpedoes were duds, and the damage was light. After that attack, Nachi remained based in Ominato, isolated once again, through the summer of 1944. By the summer of 1944, the war had changed, and Nachi had changed with it. On July 31, she was reassigned to the Kure Naval District. August was spent in intensive training, desperately preparing for the storm that was coming. Her anti-aircraft defenses were strengthened again, 2 additional twin mounts and 20 single-mount Type 96 autocannons. 48 barrels now pointed skyward. A silent acknowledgement of who controlled the battlefield in 1944. And then came October. Nachi sailed to the Philippines as part of a cruiser force under Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima. As the Battle of Leyte Gulf erupted on October 24, Nachi and Ashigara joined the southern force of Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, sailing alongside the battleships Yamashiro, Fuso, and the cruiser Mogami. It was a desperate attempt to stop the American landings at Leyte. But on October 25, after the chaos of Surigao Strait, fate turned against the Japanese fleet. Nachi and Mogami collided in the confusion, tearing into each other and suffering severe damage. Nachi was forced to withdraw to Manila for emergency repairs. On October 29, while still in port, Nachi and Kumano came under attack by aircraft from U.S. Task Force 38. A bomb struck Nachi's aircraft deck, and strafing fire killed 53 sailors. Repairs slowed to a crawl, and time was something the ship no longer had. Then came November 5, the day Nachi died. In Manila Bay, the cruiser faced three massive airstrikes launched from the carriers USS Lexington and USS Ticonderoga. She survived the first attack untouched, but during the second wave, while trying to get underway, she was struck by 5 bombs and 2, perhaps 3, torpedoes. The third wave was annihilation. 5 more torpedoes slammed into Nachi's port side, tearing the ship apart. Then came 20 bombs, and 16 rockets. Her bow and stern were blown away, the ship was ripped into pieces. The central section slipped beneath the waters, settling 31 meters down. Just 12 nautical miles northeast of Corregidor. Vice Admiral Shima, Nachi's flag commander, was ashore at the time. He arrived just soon enough to witness his flagship turn into fire, then fragments, then nothing. But perhaps the most haunting detail came not from Japan, but from the original US wartime photo caption. It read, "We circled down to 20 feet to make sure there were absolutely no survivors. 15 or 20 oily figures were served with .50 caliber, just to make sure." Of Nachi's crew, 807 men were lost, including the captain. Only 220 survived, pulled from the water by the destroyers Kasumi and Akebono. The end of Nachi was sudden, brutal, and absolute. A warship built for surface combat, speed, and torpedoes. Destroyed in a world now ruled by the sky. In April 1945, 5 months after the cruiser was torn apart in Manila Bay, divers from the submarine tender USS Chanticleer located the wreck. Over the course of April and May, Navy divers returned to the shattered hull again and again. 296 dives in total, through twisted metal, unexploded munitions, leaking oil, and the bodies of the fallen. From the broken wreck of Nachi, the Americans recovered radar technology, encrypted code books, maps of Japanese fortifications on Luzon, and other confidential military documents. Historian John Prados, in Combined Fleet Decoded, called it a major intelligence coup, one that helped the United States read the intentions of the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army during the final stage of the war. The same story is confirmed by U.S. Navy Master Diver Joseph S. Carnica, who personally led the dives on Nachi while serving aboard Chanticleer. In his memoir Navy Diver, he described how they realized, dive after dive, that Nachi was not only a shipwreck, but a vault of military secrets. Thanks for watching.